In 1989, a man walked into a Las Vegas TV station with a story so unbelievable that most people dismissed him as a liar before he could even finish his first sentence. He claimed he was a physicist. He claimed that he worked for the US government. And he claimed that hidden deep in the Nevada desert, at a facility so secret it wasn't even on a map, he had been tasked with reverse engineering alien spacecraft. He described sleek metallic discs, technology that bent the laws of physics, a propulsion system that didn't just burn fuel, it manipulated gravity itself. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he said there were 9 of these crafts, just sitting there, waiting to be studied. His name was Bob Lazar. And within days of going public, his life was turned completely upside down. Records of his vanished. His credibility, it was attacked. And some say the government tried to erase him completely. But here's the thing. Decades later, many of the details he revealed, well, they would turn out to be disturbingly accurate. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is John, and this is The Other Side. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of Area 51 and the Bob Lazar story, drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Based on my statistics, I'm a minor celebrity in Singapore, so ni hao my Singaporean brethren. Let's get into it. When Bob Lazar first appeared on television in 1989, he looked like a man who knew he was about to blow up his entire life. The lights in the studio were dimmed. His face was hidden in a deep shadow. His voice, it was electronically distorted. The name that appeared on the screen wasn't his. It was simply Dennis. And Dennis had a warning. He claimed the US government was hiding the single most important discovery in human history, and that by speaking out, he was putting himself in danger. But here's the thing. Before all of this happened, Bob Lazar was already kind of a legend in his own right, at least in certain circles. Back in the early 1980s, if you lived in Los Alamos, New Mexico, you might have spotted a strange sight. A beat-up Honda Civic with a jet engine strapped to the back. It was Bob Lazar's car. He would drive it to work at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, the same facility famous for helping create the nuclear bombs during the Manhattan Project, where, according to him, he worked as a physicist on high-energy particle accelerators. Lazar wasn't just some crackpot in a basement. He looked like the kind of guy who belonged in a high-security laboratory. Glasses, neat hair, a quiet but intense personality. He claimed he held degrees from Massachusetts Institute of Technology in physics and Caltech in electronics. On paper, he was exactly the kind of mind you'd want if you were working on unconventional technology. And it was his reputation as someone who could work on unconventional technology that Lazar says led to a phone call that would completely change his life. It was 1988. Lazar said he was contacted by a company called EG&G, a real defense contractor with deep government ties. They told him they had a special project and needed somebody with his unique background. The details were vague, but the money was good, and the secrecy, well, it was off the charts. The interview process was unlike anything he had ever experienced. He wasn't asked about salary requirements or given a tour of an office. Instead, Lazar said he was shown a stack of briefing papers, reports that looked like they were stamped with top secret. The content was truly bizarre. Technical diagrams of unfamiliar machines, discussions about the physics of anti-gravity propulsion, and even biological profiles of what the documents called extraterrestrial beings. Lazar said he assumed it was a test, a way to measure if he was discreet. He didn't talk about it, he played along. A short time later, he got his clearance. The next day, they called him. They told him to report to McCarran Airport in Las Vegas. From there, he boarded a small, unmarked plane, known today as the Janet airline, and was flown into the Nevada desert. The plane landed on a long, lonely airstrip. Waiting there was a bus with completely blacked out windows. Lazar and the other passengers rode for what felt like an eternity, unable to see anything outside. But when the bus finally stopped, the doors opened to reveal a barren mountain range. It was built directly into the side of one of the mountains, and there was a facility that looked like it had been carved from the rock itself. This, Lazar was told, was S4. What he saw inside, he would later describe as the most advanced technology on Earth, but not from Earth. When the bus stopped, Bob stepped out into the hot Nevada desert air and instantly felt like he had been dropped in another world. The mountains in front of him, they weren't just bare rock. They had doors. Massive, almost invisible hangars cut so perfectly into the stone that you could walk right past them without noticing. Armed guards stood at attention. Their uniforms were plain. No patches, no names, and their eyes tracked every movement Lazar made. He was quickly led inside. The interior of S4 was cold. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and machine oil. Every hallway was a smooth, sterile white, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that hummed quietly overhead. Security checkpoints appeared every few feet, each one manned by a guard with a weapon, with a silent, almost robotic demeanor. The deeper they went, the stranger it all became. Lazar passed laboratories filled with equipment he couldn't immediately identify. The walls were lined with security cameras that seemed to follow him. The scientist he passed barely looked up, and when they did, there was no smile, only a quick, assessing glance before their eyes dropped back to whatever was in front of them. And then he saw it. Through an open doorway at the end of a long corridor, Lazar caught a glimpse of something that didn't belong in a human laboratory. Sitting on the floor of the hangar bay was a craft, smooth, metallic, and shaped like a perfect disc. It wasn't a mock-up, it wasn't a drawing. It was there, solid, it was real. Lazar said he was later told there were 9 of these craft stored at S4, each one slightly different in size and design, as if they had been recovered from different sources or different species. Some were heavily damaged, others looked untouched. He would eventually be assigned to work on one specific craft, one the scientists nicknamed the Sport Model because of how sleek and compact the design was. His job wasn't to build it, but to figure out how it worked, so the government could replicate the technology. According to Lazar, the heart of the craft was a propulsion system powered by a mysterious element, an element that, at the time, did not exist on the periodic table. It was called Element 115. When used properly, it didn't push the craft forward the way a rocket engine does. It bent space-time itself, allowing the craft to fall toward its destination. To Lazar, it was mind-blowing. To the government, it was a potential game changer. And to anybody outside those mountain doors, it was a secret worth killing to protect. Bob Lazar says when he first stood next to the craft he was assigned to study, the so-called sports model, he expected it to be bigger. In person, it was only about 16 feet across and maybe 10 feet tall. The surface was a dull metallic gray, seamless, like it had been poured into existence instead of built. There were no rivets, no weld marks, no visible access panels. Even the landing gear was strange. 3 smooth pods that looked more grown than manufactured. Lazar was allowed inside the craft. The interior, he says, was even stranger than the outside. There were no sharp angles anywhere. Every surface was curved. The walls flowed into the ceilings into the floor. The space was tight, like it wasn't built for humans. And there were no visible controls, no switches, buttons, or screens. Just smooth, bare surfaces with a central column that extended from floor to ceiling. That central column, Lazar was told, was the key. It housed the reactor. The reactor was powered by a piece of element 115, a material Lazar says was stable and naturally produced a gravitational field. When the reactor was activated, it amplified and focused that gravity, creating a quote-unquote gravity wave. The craft didn't push its way through space the way an airplane does. It fell toward its destination because of the gravity wave that bent the space in front of it. Think of it like a bowling ball on a trampoline. Everything on that trampoline rolls toward it. Now imagine being able to move the bowling ball to wherever you want to go. That is exactly what the system did. When Lazar was briefed on the other craft, he was told something that rattled him. These weren't prototypes that the US had built. They were recovered. Some had been found in archaeological digs, which implied they weren't just from another planet, but that they might be ancient. But getting to work on this technology wasn't as simple as walking in and flipping a switch. The security at S4 was almost suffocating. Every morning, Lazar would be picked up at a secure location, flown to Groom Lake, the airstrip connected to Area 51, and then bused to S4 in those same blacked out buses. The scientists were not allowed to talk about their work outside of their own specific assignment. If your job was the reactor, you didn't ask about the propulsion coils. If your job was propulsion, you didn't ask about navigation. Everyone was compartmentalized. Lazar said the rules were so strict, he couldn't even talk to the other scientists in the lunchroom unless he had his assigned security escort present. Even then, most conversations were short and nervous because everybody believed they were being listened to. One day, while walking past another hangar bay, Lazar glanced inside and saw something that made his stomach drop. It was another craft, but this one had its hatch open, and standing next to it, he swears, were 2 small figures. At first he thought they were scientists in protective suits, but then he realized the proportions were all wrong. Moments later, a guard stepped in front of him, blocking his view. Without saying a word, the guard pointed him down the hallway. Lazar didn't see those 2 alien-looking figures again. But that brief glimpse left him with a chilling thought. Maybe the real secret at S4 wasn't just the technology. Maybe it was who or what the technology came from. When Bob Lazar first spoke publicly in 1989, one of the most outrageous parts of his story wasn't even the UFOs. It was the fuel source he claimed they used. He said the heart of the sports model craft's reactor was powered by something no scientist on Earth had ever handled before: element 115. Now, at the time, the periodic table only went up to 109. The idea of an element 115 wasn't just unproven, it sounded like science fiction. Lazar insisted it was real, that it wasn't a man-made element like uranium or plutonium, and that it had extraordinary properties. Like, when hit with the right kind of radiation, it produced its own gravity field. This, he claimed, was the secret to the propulsion system. Once again, the reactor didn't push the craft forward. It bent the space ahead of it, making the craft fall toward its destination. It could hover without visible support, accelerate instantly without throwing passengers against the walls, and make sharp turns that would tear apart any conventional aircraft. The problem was, there was no evidence Element 115 even existed. The scientific community dismissed the claim immediately. The periodic table, they said, was well understood, and any element that high would be so unstable it would decay in less than a second. If Lazar was telling the truth, they argued, he'd be holding proof of an entirely new branch of physics in his hands. But when reporters asked to see a sample, Lazar couldn't produce one. Skeptics pounced. They dug into his background and pointed out that there were no records of him attending MIT or Caltech. No classmates who remembered him. No employment records from Los Alamos that placed him in the kind of position he described. And to them, it was simple. Bob Lazar was making it all up. But Lazar's supporters argued the opposite. That the reason there was no records was because somebody had deliberately erased them. In fact, George Knapp, the reporter who broke the Lazar story, found Lazar's name listed in an old Los Alamos phone directory. Proof, Knapp said, that Lazar had at least worked there in some capacity. And then, in 2003, something strange happened. A team of Russian and American scientists managed to create Element 115. At least, a version of it. They called it Moscovium. It was exactly as the skeptics predicted. Incredibly unstable, lasting only fractions of a second before decaying. Skeptics said this proved Lazar wrong. His stable Element 115 couldn't exist on Earth. But believers pointed out that Lazar never claimed it could be made in a lab. He said it was a naturally occurring stable isotope that just simply didn't exist on Earth. In other words, what the scientists created in 2003 was a poor imitation, a fragile copy of something far more powerful. The discovery didn't prove Lazar right, but it didn't make him look that crazy either. And for some people, that was enough to keep the door open. If an element once thought impossible to exist had turned out to be real, even for a fraction of a second, maybe the rest of the story wasn't as far-fetched as it sounded. After Bob Lazar went public in 1989, he said his life stopped belonging to him. Almost overnight, he went from being a quiet, curious scientist to a man at the center of one of the most controversial stories in American history. And that spotlight wasn't necessarily friendly. According to Lazar, within days of his first interview airing, strange things started to happen. People began following him in unmarked cars. His phone would click and pop in the middle of calls, like somebody was listening in. And most troubling of all, places he swore that he had worked at, like MIT, Caltech, and Los Alamos, suddenly had no record of him ever being there. Friends he had known for years said they were visited by men in suits asking questions about him. Former colleagues stopped returning his calls. To Lazar, it was obvious. The government was erasing him. And whether you'd like to believe that or not, something was happening behind the scenes, because Lazar's career never recovered. He left the scientific world and opened a business called United Nuclear, selling scientific equipment and chemicals to hobbyists, schools, and researchers. For a while, it was quiet and Lazar stayed mostly out of the UFO spotlight. But in 2018, documentary filmmaker Jeremy Corbell convinced him to tell his story again. The result was a documentary called Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers. The film reignited public interest in Lazar's claims, and apparently somebody else was interested as well. While Corbell was filming, Lazar says he noticed increased surveillance, strange cars parked near his property, unfamiliar faces showing up in places they didn't belong. Corbell himself claims that he and Lazar had to be careful where they spoke, assuming rooms were bugged by the government. Then in 2017, just before filming wrapped, something happened that Corbell called straight out of a movie. Lazar's business, United Nuclear, was raided by the FBI. Officially, the raid was tied to an investigation of the possible illegal sale of toxic chemicals. But Lazar believes it was something else entirely: the search for element 115. He had mentioned in interviews that he once possessed a small amount of the material during his time at S4. And in Corbell's documentary, Lazar says the agents didn't just look for paperwork or hazardous materials, they questioned him in detail about his past work, S4, and element 115. To Lazar, it was a confirmation of what he had been saying all along. They never stopped watching him. And decades later, they were still willing to show up unannounced with a small army of agents, just to make sure he wasn't keeping any alien secrets. The raid left Lazar shaken. In the documentary, you can see it. He's not smiling, he's not excited about the attention. He looks tired, exhausted even. For him, this wasn't an adventure, it was a reminder that telling the truth, or at least his truth, came with a price he's been paying for 30 years. And it made some people wonder, if Bob Lazar is just a liar making it all up, why the hell is the government still knocking on his door? For decades, Bob Lazar's story has existed in a strange no man's land between fact and fiction. And part of the reason it's never gone away is because, frustratingly, there's just enough evidence to make you wonder, and just enough contradiction to make you doubt. Let's start with the things that seem to support him. First, in 1989, before Area 51 was widely known, Lazar correctly described details about the base that were later confirmed. He mentioned flight patterns, the existence of a dry lake bed at Groom Lake, and the location of certain hangars. Years later, declassified documents and satellite imagery matched those descriptions. Second, the infamous Los Alamos directory. Skeptics claim Lazar never worked at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, but journalist George Knapp found Lazar's name in an old employee phone book. Even more compelling, a Los Alamos Monitor newspaper article from the 80s profiled Lazar as a, quote, physicist at Los Alamos. This included a photo of him standing in front of a particle accelerator. And third, the Wednesday night UFO flights. Lazar claimed that the test craft at S4 were scheduled on specific evenings. In the late 80s, he took friends to a ridge overlooking the restricted airspace. Multiple people, including one with a video camera, captured strange lights darting and maneuvering in ways that no known aircraft replicate. But here's where the problems start. First, there's no education records. There is no official proof that Lazar attended MIT or Caltech. No transcripts, no yearbook entries, no classmates who remember him. Lazar says those records were erased, and some skeptics say they never existed. Secondly, the physics of it. While element 115 is now real, at least in its unstable, lab-made form, scientists say the kind of stable isotope Lazar describes would require an entirely different kind of nuclear landscape than the Earth has ever seen. To them, it's like saying you have a perpetual motion machine. Fascinating, but impossible. Third, Lazar does have some shifting details. Over the years, some parts of his story have changed, either in the specifics of what he saw or the way he describes the technology. Skeptics point to these changes as proof that he's embellishing or adapting his story to fit new information. And then there's the biggest question of all. If Lazar did smuggle out a piece of element 115, why hasn't he shown it to the public? He says it's too dangerous and that it would put him in more trouble than he's already in. But for many people, that's the single piece of evidence that could prove him right instantly, and without it, they remain unconvinced. So where does that leave us? With a man who somehow has managed to stay in the public conversation for over 30 years. A man who's been called a hoaxer, a whistleblower, a genius, and a fraud. And sometimes all of those in the same sentence. And we're left with a story that refuses to die, no matter how many times people try to bury it. By the mid-1990s, the Bob Lazar story had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't just a strange news segment anymore. It became part of the modern UFO mythos. Before Lazar, Area 51 was barely a blip in the public imagination. Yes, there were rumors about a secret base in Nevada, but it didn't have the aura it does today. Lazar's account, the 9 alien spacecrafts, the reverse engineering, the secret hangars carved in the mountainsides. That gave Area 51 its identity. His story turned it from an obscure military facility to the most famous top secret base in the world, and pop culture bounced on it. In 1996, the movie Independence Day featured a hidden alien spacecraft stored at Area 51, overseen by scientists who sounded suspiciously like Lazar. TV shows like The X-Files built entire plot lines around shady government programs reverse engineering alien tech. Even video games like Grand Theft Auto and Call of Duty have tucked nods into S4, Element 115, and Lazar's claims. And then, in 2019, something bizarre happened. A joke Facebook event called Storm Area 51, They Can't Stop Us All, went viral, attracting over 2 million RSVPs. The idea? Rush the gates at the base and, quote, see them aliens. The US Air Force had to issue public warnings telling people to not try this. While it ended up as more of a desert music festival than an invasion, the very fact that it happened showed just how deep Area 51, and by extension Bob Lazar, had sunk into the public consciousness. Meanwhile, Lazar himself has never really embraced celebrity. Unlike many conspiracy figures, he doesn't tour the UFO conference circuit or churn out books. He's turned down most interview requests, and in the few appearances he has made, like in Jeremy Corbell's documentary, he comes across not as a man cashing in on a story, but as someone who almost regrets ever telling the story. And maybe that's why part of the story endures. He doesn't act like somebody desperate for fame. He doesn't seem to be getting rich off of this. If anything, he seems tired of all the bullshit. But his claims, and the mental images of those 9 alien craft sitting in a desert hangar, have shaped how millions of people imagine the UFO mystery. For believers, he's the ultimate whistleblower. For skeptics, he's full of shit and the most effective hoaxer in UFO history. And for pop culture, he's the man who gave Area 51 its legend. Bob Lazar's claims may be the most famous, but they're just the tip of the iceberg. Over the years, the Nevada desert has been a breeding ground for stories. Some whispered by locals, others leaked by supposed insiders about what else might be hidden behind the base's towering fences and armed patrols. Some are plausible, some are downright ridiculous, and some are so bizarre that if even 1% of them were true, the world would never be the same. The first rumor takes us back to the late 80s and early 90s. Aviation spotters, the kind of people who spend their weekends camped out near restricted airspace with long-range lenses and radio scanners, begin reporting strange sonic booms over Nevada and Southern California. But these weren't the sharp cracks you'd get from fighter jets breaking the sound barrier. These were deep, rolling, almost heartbeat-like pulses. They were perfectly spaced out. Some listeners said it was like a giant massive drum beating somewhere in the sky. Others swore they could feel vibrations in their chest. Whispers started about an experimental spy plane called Aurora, a wedge-shaped craft that could supposedly fly above Mach 6, high enough to be invisible to radar and fast enough to outrun any missile on Earth. According to these rumors, Aurora used something called a pulse detonation wave engine, which might explain the strange rhythmic booms. No proof ever surfaced, but in 1992, an entry in a classified Pentagon budget line item for quote, black projects listed a sudden jump in spending, almost $9 billion more, right when Aurora sightings peaked. Officially, the US government has denied the program even existed. Unofficially, it's become one of the most persistent Area 51 legends ever told. Then there's rumors of a very different kind of research. According to multiple supposed whistleblowers, somewhere deep inside Area 51, there's a medical wing. Clean, white, sterile, and that is where the bodies of extraterrestrials are being preserved. Some say these bodies come from the infamous Roswell crash of 1947, where a disc-shaped craft allegedly went down in the New Mexico desert, had provided the military with both alien technology and alien biology to study. The most famous evidence was a grainy black and white video released in 1995, supposedly showing doctors in hazmat suits dissecting a gray-skinned being with a large bulbous head and black almond-shaped eyes. The footage swept the world, it aired on TV specials, it was debated in newspapers. Years later, the filmmaker admitted it was staged, but the damage was done. Millions of people had already burned the image in their minds, and for them, the idea of an alien body at Area 51 was a permanent possibility. Even today, people living near the Nevada Test and Training Range report seeing lights that defy logic. Bright orbs that hover silently for minutes before shooting straight up and vanishing. Triangular formations that glide across the night sky with no sound at all, then tilt and vanish in a split second. In the 1990s, a small group of UFO enthusiasts actually started camping out on public land just outside the restricted zone. They'd bring lawn chairs, cameras, and binoculars hoping to catch a glimpse. Some left with shaky camcorder footage showing white glowing balls moving in ways no known aircraft could. Skeptics say it's experimental drones. Believers say it's something not of Earth. Then we get to the deeper, like literally deeper, rumors. According to some former workers and conspiracy theorists, Area 51 is just the entrance to a sprawling network of underground tunnels and chambers stretching hundreds of miles. These tunnels supposedly connect to other classified facilities, like Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, or even the more secretive base under Papoose Lake. Some maps drawn by whistleblowers show massive freight elevators capable of lowering entire aircraft underground, and a subterranean maglev train shuttling people between locations at hundreds of miles per hour. A few of these claims come from people who say they work there, describing a sense of descending forever in an elevator before reaching a level so deep they could no longer feel surface vibrations. What was down there? Labs, hangars, and some stories, things that weren't human. Then we get to the point where the rumors start to sound like science fiction gone wild. Some claim Area 51 has tested directed energy weapons, capable of knocking satellites out of orbit. Others talk about gravity manipulation experiments, where engineers attempt to bend or warp space-time itself, not unlike what Bob Lazar claimed with Element 115. The strangest of these are the time travel and teleportation projects. These stories allege that physicists at the base have experimented with folding space so that an object could disappear from one location and instantly reappear in another. One version claims they were inspired by technology recovered from alien craft. Another say it was purely made by humans, the product of decades of hidden research dating back to the Cold War. But maybe the most unnerving theory of all is that Area 51 is nothing but a diversion. Some conspiracy researchers believe that the government wants you to focus on Groom Lake. They say all the alien tech, advanced aircraft, and deep research facility have been long gone and moved to other sites, possibly underground bases in Colorado, Utah, or even Antarctica. In this version of the story, Area 51 is the lightning rod, a place to attract UFO chasers, journalists, and conspiracy buffs, so they don't look in the real direction. Whatever the truth is, one thing is for certain. Area 51 isn't just a base. It's a symbol, a physical embodiment of the phrase, "We know something you don't." And every time someone tries to dismiss the rumors, two more seem to pop up in its place. Bob Lazar's story has been debated, dissected, and doubted for over 30 years. Skeptics point to the inconsistencies in his background. Supporters point to the uncanny accuracy of certain details he gave long before they were ever public. But whether you believe Lazar was a whistleblower risking his life to tell the truth, or a gifted storyteller spinning the ultimate sci-fi yarn, his account was the spark that ignited something bigger. Because Area 51 isn't just a patch of desert anymore. It is the modern symbol of secrecy. It's the place our minds go when we wonder what the government is hiding from us. And maybe the most unsettling part is, we know for a fact they are hiding something. The question is what? We've heard the rumors, spy planes faster than bullets, alien autopsies deep underground, lights in the sky that move like living things, tunnels stretching for miles connecting unseen cities beneath our feet, and experiments that flirt with the edges of time and reality itself. We laugh them off until the details line up, until one classified document leaks, until one retired worker says something they shouldn't have. And then, in the back of your mind, a question starts to grow. If even one of these stories is true, just one, then the world we think we live in isn't the real one. The fences, the guards, the endless miles of desert, they're not just keeping something out, they're also keeping something in. And somewhere, right now, under a stretch of Nevada sand, the truth is sitting in a hangar, waiting for the day someone finally sees it. This is The Other Side. My name is John. If you made it this far, thank you. I love you. Goodbye.